Hello and welcome to a spoiler-free Wonder Woman 1984 review. I promise you absolutely zero spoilers. There will not be a spoiler in any of this. If I get a conversation that would involve a spoiler, I'm going to save that question for my spoiler full review. Absolutely no spoilers will be had on this conversation today. I just finished the movie. I waited till sunset so I could see it as properly as possible. As you all know, I am a giant advocate for movie theaters. I think the theatrical experience is essential, so I wanted to at least give myself the benefit of a dark room and my screen looking as good as possible. So I waited until sunset, just finished the movie. It is a long movie, and I needed it to be long, so actually we'll get into that in just a moment. But I'm so glad I was able to watch it before I heard too much. So that's why I'm assuring you there will not be any spoilers whatsoever. Now, Wonder Woman, the first film, set an impossibly high bar. For me, Wonder Woman 1 is amongst the great superhero films. I'd put it probably in my top 15, and I talk about superhero movies for a living. I read comic books for a living, and I watch movies for a living. Comic book movies mean a lot to me. So it being in my top 15 is a testament to its greatness. I think it has a perfect two acts and a good third act. And good didn't work compared to the near perfection of the first two acts. So in my estimation, I went from it being an A+ one act, A+ second act, thinking I was in for this incredible time, and then when the third act was closer to a B-, it dropped the average of the film to, your B+, A-, just by the math of my experience of the film. What I had an interesting time with this film, the sequel, for me, did a very opposing thing. For me, the pacing I struggled with was in the late first act and some of the second act, and then the third act of the film was my favorite. So it's a really interesting dichotomy that is so specific to these two films. Now, the third act of the first film is very controversial. It's often discussed as far as like what happened and what the movie was, and I don't think any part of this film for an entire act has that kind of highs and lows. But I would say the first couple acts are more in the B range, and then the third act for me is in that A- range. So overall, the film for me lands lower than the first film, but it's by no means a not enjoyable experience. It does not make my top 15. It doesn't set the same standard of greatness the first one did. And some of those problems are the sequelitis of the film. It's always the assumption to go bigger. And this movie doesn't always do that, but there were some moments that felt like it needed to. And there's also the expectation factor. We knew we wanted a lot out of the first Wonder Woman, but we didn't know we were going to have our lives rocked by the first Wonder Woman. So I think expectations going into this one were quite high. There's been a lot of conversation about the third act, especially in the last 48 hours, with Patty Jenkins saying they wanted her to change the third act of the film, that, the CGI in the third act was something the studio wanted, and I can see where the studio's notes came from for the different two flavors of the third act. It does mesh better than you'd expect. I can actually also see where she's coming from, where I would have loved the third act that I think she had imagined. This will all make sense when you've seen the film. That said, I don't think it was as detracting of a studio note as perhaps the notes that came in the third act for the first film. So overall, it was a more consistent experience. Overall, I do think this is going to wow a lot of people. I do wish I could have seen it in theaters the first time. I definitely was emotionally invested and involved in a number of scenes that I can't imagine how much more impactful they would have been with a crowd, which isn't safe right now, which is why I think it should have been delayed. And how much more impactful they would have been with my seat rumbling and the 100-foot screen and all those things. I know we can't have that right now. I would have loved for this film to come out in a year, personally, and that's just my experience. I think there's a lot of emotionality and a lot of vulnerability and a lot of spectacle, and those things don't often blend, but the wonderful thing about Wonder Woman and Patty Jenkins and Gal Gadot, I don't know how to pronounce it, I apologize to Gal, is they are able to imbue so much emotion into the action and so much action into the emotion that I would have loved to experience this for the first time in the way it was shot. Big and bold and crazy. So I don't know if my experience would have been a higher rating had I seen it in theaters, but I want to give that caveat that there were moments that I was well aware that I wanted to have this be a theatrical experience, and that did change my experience of the film overall. So that being said, I did, right before we aired, take a couple notes that I wanted to make sure I got across to you guys. This is the first time I've done a review live. I usually do a live review as part of my show, or I do a pre-taped review and then upload it. This, I thought, will be maybe the new format going forward. I think the idea of having you guys in the chat is fun. If you want to ask me any questions, the Streamlabs I'm going to check throughout. But in this live format, I'm going to do pros, cons, overall, and then obviously no spoilers. And then I'm going to drop another review probably in a week and a half. That'll be full spoilers and we can dive into the nitty-gritty, but I think a live review has some fun flavor to it because it's all happening right now. And I just finished the movie, so all this is fresh. All right, so kicking it off. First, pros. One pro is absolutely Cheetah. I feel like this is the thing that people were going to ask me first, so I wanted to head off with it. Cheetah looks incredible, is incredible, is so much more than I expected in both the Kristen Wiig experience and in the way her visuals, which were released at DC Fandom, so this is not a spoiler, are so practical with a CGI blend that it reminded me of Jurassic Park. That is the highest praise I can give a character like this. Jurassic Park, I think, even, approaching, 25 years later, is still the most visually stunning experience I've had. Like the slight CGI over practical, and whatever they did to make Cheetah, that blend really works. Now, yes, there are moments that are, a little CGI heavy in some of the fights, but I did not mind them because when I saw her, it's so hard not to spoil, when I saw her in less motion, I was so struck by how great Cheetah looked. The practical effects are second to none, especially in the superhero genre. I was so impressed with Cheetah. I was impressed with Barbara. When she, Kristen Wiig got this role, I'd been excited because I think a lot of times comedic actresses and actors are exceptional at drama. You look at your Jim Carreys or Robin Williams, you look at Kristen Wiig and a lot of her dramatic work, you see this raw vulnerability and talent that comes from comedy, and that is on display here like you wouldn't believe. The vulnerability of this character, the believability of this character is absolutely insane. So I really liked that. I felt like I got Cheetah in a way that I didn't think we'd get. I can't speak higher of that take on the character, and I was very excited for it. So the bar was already high, and I enjoyed it more than I expected. So Cheetah, top notch. The action. The action was spectacular. I loved the action in the first film. I think the way that Patty Jenkins developed a very specific fight style for Wonder Woman, using her strength but also her grace, using her femininity but also her brute force, that is even more fun once you've accepted your suspension of disbelief. Like, you're really believing her choices in this one because we've already had that experience in the first film. So I love the dynamic sliding they do. This one has a lot of incredible wire work. The wire work on this also, much like Cheetah, I couldn't see the line between the wire work and the CGI. A couple times I did, but overall I couldn't, and I usually am bothered by it. Usually that's a thing for me. I'm like, well, that's the wire work ended and the CGI started. There's enough times in this that I was so blown away by the wire work, I wrote down wire work as far as the action. Overwhelmed with the amount of practical that really impressed me in this film, and that is the thing I like most in these large spectacle films, is when they try to make it as real as possible, and this one does land that. There are 3 particular set pieces that really blew me away. I'm not going to tell you what they are, just know that there are 3 individual action set pieces that I was like, yes! And I will talk about all 3 of those in the spoiler review a week or a week and a half into this movie being publicly available, because I'm not a monster. So action, top notch, very impressed. Patty Jenkins continues to wow me with her very visual style and her very dynamic flavor of action. The comic book nod I hoped for but didn't think would affect me as much as it did happen in this film. There is a comic book thing, I'm going to be as vague booking as possible, that I did not expect to be emotional about, and was. And this is one of the things that I wish I'd seen in theaters. There's a thing from the comics that the way it was handled made me want to share that experience with as many people, as well as seeing it big and loud and everything else. It's something I wanted for as long as they'd announced the character. So again, spoiler review, I'm going to say what that moment was, but I was emotional, didn't expect that. I want to thank everyone involved for making that moment a comic fan's dream and executing it like the film needed to make it a film moment. Vague booking, spoiler-free review. It's a fine dance. We're doing ballet. Steve Trevor, man. Okay, Steve Trevor is such an important character in the first film because he's our eye line, he's our access to good and bad because he's our human and he's our male. He is so wholesome and wonderful, but also human. He's the best of humanity in so many ways, and that helps Diana believe in humanity. The way they take his character in this ties into that, while also giving us a new way of appreciating the character, because a lot of the fun of the first film we get to experience through Steve Trevor this time. So I personally got a lot out of not just how they brought Steve Trevor back, which I'm so glad I didn't know beforehand, but also in the way they brought Steve Trevor back, the storytelling gets to be a lot more fun because you're engrossed in a different narrative involving Steve Trevor that still ties into the character of the first in all the ways you love him. He gets to do with a new setting, being that's this movie. So wow, that was way harder than I thought. No matter what, the awestruck wonder of Steve Trevor is an absolute delight, and the chemistry between Gal and Chris is just as strong as the first. It's still, for me, the two best love stories in comic books are Ryan Reynolds and Marina Baccarin in Deadpool and Diana and Steve in Wonder Woman. To me, those are the love stories in comic book movies. There have been other great flirtations and great passionate moments. The passion between Bruce and Selina in Batman Returns stands out, and I love Peggy and Steve, but this is so much more than that to me. So I'm gonna give it to the great Chris Pine and Gal in this for continuing that chemistry top-notch, believing every moment of it, loving their love so dearly. Definitely a highlight of the film. I just saw a Streamlab pop up from the great Michael McCarsell, so I've got to jump on that before I head over to the next bit of wonderment. Give me just a moment to open that. My bad, I did not prep this because I just finished the movie about 10 minutes ago, but I thought it'd be fun to do a very impromptu live review with minimal prep. But so far, I've been able to not say anything I regret, and I was very worried that like Warner Brothers be like, hey, way to blah, 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 and then darkness, just darkness. Just a moment. I'm going to be opening this while I'm talking about the next point. The way Steve is back does work, and the way Steve is back is a great secret, and the way Steve is back works for the story. The way the world building leads to the third act, likewise, is one of my favorite parts of the film. In that I did not know what I thought of blank until the third act. And it was really interesting that the third act is what got me in. Like, I wasn't sure if I was vibing, and then the third act retroactively hooked me in for a lot of plot elements. So I was really impressed, and once again, I opened this review with being surprised that the third act did the opposite that it did for me from the first film. I was so impressed with the third act of this telling me everything I needed to in a way that really, really landed for me. So, sorry, I have to confirm it's me, and it's on my phone, and I'm on my phone. So this is what happens to do a live review. It gets zesty. So all of those things really line up in the third act. So if you were like me and the first two acts don't quite have you, know that the third act, if you had your same experience I did, is really gonna sink you into the film. Michael McCarsell had the following to say: so glad to hear the movie is good. I'm so excited to watch it in just a few days. I get the feeling I'll adore this movie. Now, Michael and I have very similar taste in film. It is definitely worth all of the waiting. It's definitely worth the glory that is Wonder Woman. It's definitely worth all of the talent. It is not as good as the first to me, And I want people going in with those expectations because they might even enjoy it more than I did because of those expectations. I went in with Wonder Woman 1 expectations. I wish I'd gone in with superhero movie expectations. But again, Wonder Woman's in my top 15, very high, but it is a hell of a time, and I wish I could have experienced it in theaters. And Michael, I think you're gonna dig it, man. And thank you. I'm digging the impromptu reviews as well. So let's see how many we can dig up. And maybe I'll start doing my Patreon reviews live as well, because this is a fun, different flavor, because the stakes feel so high. All right, I talked about the third act, the world building to it, how much the third act sings and retroactively makes a lot of things work. Now, Max Lord, as we know, is a giant Wonder Woman villain, and Max Lord is, as we know, no spoilers, in this film, Pedro Pascal does an incredible job Guru and Tony Robbinsing his way through every scene. The scenery chewing is delightful. The laughter this man brings to Max Lord, the glee, is wonderful. I really don't know what I would change about the way the first act Max Lord is, but where we get to in late second and all of third act Max Lord is a delight. So once again, I don't know what I'd change, but I really grew to like Max Lord more than I expected to when the first act I was like, I don't know. I really dig the character. I really did Pedro Pascal's performance. I really dig the way it worked for both comic book and film logic, and I really liked the way it worked in this movie's mythology because it deals with so much scope. It deals with so much broad ideas, and it really lands, and I was really impressed with Max Lord. So good for Pedro Pascal doing so much instead of living under a mask. That man has range. He can just love a Grogu through a mask, and can also just be a full-on Tony Robbins power suit powerhouse of a character, and I was super impressed. So it is interesting how much more I liked him later in the film than in the beginning, and it wasn't in the way of like, this is a villain and I don't like his choices, and it wasn't in the way of like, I don't think he's acting well. There's something in the portrayal that doesn't really work for me until later, and I could not put my finger on the moment it happened, but all of a sudden I was like, wait, I'm in. So take that as you will. Non-spoiler take on the Max Lord. This is very fun. I feel snipers upon me. The third act in general is also a spectacle that I wish I could have experienced because the emotions of the third act are what I loved the most. The build up to it makes you care about so many characters' ramifications, and the wonder that is Patty Jenkins is she can bring so much emotion out of so many talented people and shoot it like a Roland Emmerich film. And the third act, for me, truly captures that. There is so much in the third act that is just raw emotionality that feels earned, that doesn't feel soap operatic, that doesn't feel cliche, doesn't feel trite. It's delightful. I'm gonna keep using that word because that is, I think, if I had a one-word review for the third act, it is somehow delightful what she accomplishes. So the third act in general, top marks, quite the thing, especially in a superhero film. So look forward to where it lands for my experience, and especially since that's the reverse of the first film. Gal is Wonder Woman. I wrote down in all caps, Gal is Wonder Woman. Every look, every tick, every gesture, every movement, every decision, everything is Wonder Woman. I bought Diana Prince in the first film, and it was a very different world and setting, World War I, and I was worried, to be honest, how I would experience her in the 80s because I didn't know how it was a movie in the 80s, and I'm not going to tell you, and I overthought it, I'll tell you, but I didn't know how that character would translate, and it does, and I really was impressed with her making Diana Prince so much fun in a completely different way. And I also really liked that they were able to have other characters get some time in the spotlight, and she could be, a little background and still be Diana and, impossibly gorgeous and captivating and interesting. So she's never in the background. She's just not in the spotlight. And all of her choices aren't any lesser. And then she comes back and just owns again. And that's all Gal. And I was just super impressed. The new suit, also in all caps, the new suit is bitchin'. The new suit, that entire sequence is fantastic. The other stuff with the new suit, you'll see, fantastic. The actual build of the suit, like, tip of the hat to the costume designer. I loved how mobile it seemed. I loved how versatile it seemed. I loved that there's a sequence where it's, this isn't a spoiler, it just feels like I'm saying something. There's a sequence where it's not used there's a sequence where it's super functional instead of being a super suit, and I was like, oh, awesome. And I was so impressed. The functionality of the suit, both in story and build and execution, both practically and CGI, incredible, excellent suit. I'm big on super suits. And the opening sequence, the very beginning of the film, we're almost through the pros and there's only 5 cons, so if you guys are bored, we're almost done. If your attention is wavering, we just hit 20 minutes and I was planning on doing this only for 15, but I really got into it. The opening sequence is staggering, and it reminds you how much you love the first film. It is a lean back, holy shit sequence. It is also, I want that movie, I want that show, I want that HBO Max experience, I want more of that. I think you can see it now. I think Slash Film and a few other places ran it. I think you have access to the opening scene. I'm not sure if it's still up, but I think it was officially released, and I adored the opening sequence. So I was really impressed. Again, something I would have loved to have seen in IMAX. Also, the mall. I'm a mall junkie. I'm a mall rat, proudly through and through, have been for decades, and the use of mall in this is how 1984 should be represented, and they landed it. It felt like I wanted it to. It felt like the malls I remember. I'm not old enough to have experienced 1984, but my parents were teenagers in the 80s because they had me young, so I experienced the 80s quite densely through my family, and then I grew up in a very small town where the mall was still like the 80s until the 2000s. So the mall is very important to me, and holy shit, I love the mall sequence. You'll see. The fights, the powers, last 2 notes. The fights, again, Patty Jenkins gets a lot of emotion out of action, and the fights don't feel like your traditional superhero fight. They don't feel too Paul Greengrassy where you can't tell what's going on. They also don't feel too, that punch didn't mean anything, that punch didn't mean anything. Actions have consequences. They're also really poetic. There's also a lot of beautiful exchanges of weight and actual martial arts. There's actually stuff that feels like it was choreographed with the knowledge of 8 steps ahead in case it came up. There's so much forethought in these fights. Superhero fight's vital to a movie working, and this one has some greats. Especially, there's not a hallway like Daredevil hallway, but there's a great hallway sequence. And there's also, as we teased in fandom, some really spectacular stuff with Cheetah that is... So the fights, also very good. And just like in the first film, I love how they utilize Steve Trevor in the fights. I love his participation in the fights. Very hard, without spoilers, you guys. The powers. This is the first thing that borders on a con. I liked the powers, but there's something that happens that, like, I didn't. The powers... evolve in a wonderful way. There is some scenes in this that power use made me feel like I was a kid again. There's some really cool power use that reminds you what's special about these movies. There's some really interesting evolutions and dynamics with powers that, you know, I think DC handles really, really well. Cheetah's powers are great. The movie's logic around powers is fantastic, and it is... I can't wait for the spoiler version of this conversation about powers, but know that the power set stuff was quite freaking rad. All right, over to cons. Late Act 1 and early Act 2, or some of Act 2. I couldn't quite tell where I was feeling out of it. That said, there was definitely some moments that didn't work, and I couldn't tell you which ones they were. I wasn't taking notes to the film. I was trying to be invested. But I was definitely taken out for a few moments, and I picked up my phone twice, which I don't... I mean, one of the benefits of the movie theater is I can't do it in the movie theater, right? But I didn't like that I noticed myself pick up my phone to check an email, and I wasn't on it for long, but I definitely checked an email. And there was just a couple pacing issues. That's my first con, is there was some pacing issues. There was a couple moments that just felt like they were added. There was a couple moments that just didn't really... It's not that they weren't necessary. I couldn't, like, if I was an editor, I couldn't be like, well, that minute and this 5 minutes, nothing like that. But I wavered in my attention, and that is something worth noting. Streamlab from Mr. Last Ivan. Or Lastaven, like an alcohol. It sounds like a great like Belgian beer, like a Lastaven. Lastaven, how many times did you pause or check your phone or take it? That's ironic, dude, considering my last comment. Did you check your phone or take a quick break? After this experience, are you more or less on board with the HBO Max slate? Twice I checked my phone. I paused once to get food because I had made chicken nuggets like a grown man. The chicken nuggets beckoned. I needed hunger. It's 2 hours and 10 or so minutes. I had to make the choice. I paused. Otherwise, 2 phone breaks. So 2 minutes, 2 acknowledgements of phone and 1 pause is the answer to your question. I'm less enthused about HBO Max getting all these movies because I have the willpower of an small child. So if I have 100 things to do, which I never don't have 100 things to do, it's the holidays, like it's Christmas is fucking 2 days, and I still was checking for emails just in case. If like when Dune comes out in the spring or fall, I don't remember, I'm gonna be on my phone the whole time, which sucks. I hate it. I don't like watching I don't like my first experience of a film being at home ever. I don't like it with made-for-Netflix movies. I'm the dude that would rather go see Stranger Things in a theater. I'm the dude that goes and sees the Netflix original movies at iPix. Like, I went and saw 7 Underground at iPix because I knew I'd rather see it in a theater than at home. I don't like the home experience. I like watching movies with people. I like watching movies on 100-foot screens. I don't care how many inches your TV is, it's not feet. And I don't like watching movies where I have the ability to pause and pee. I like theaters. So I do worry about the HBO Max slate, and I also think this movie probably suffered between a half and full grade drop. Like, I think this is going to be an A-, B+, and it's leaning towards B+, and it might have been a solid A- if I got it the first time in the theater, if that makes any sense. Like, I think it's on a line that it wouldn't have been if I saw it in theaters. So the theatrical experience is vital, and I do worry about every fucking thing on that HBO Max slate not being as much of an experience. I get we're in COVID times, but if the movies aren't gonna go bad, they're not fruit, you know? They can fucking wait. We have hundreds of years of movies on streaming and more TV than you can ever watch in a lifetime. So I don't agree with it. It's a bummer. It affected my experience. I would have probably cried at least one time, maybe twice, and I'm not much of a crier, but I'm getting more cry-y in my older age. Like, I have nothing against, I think more men should cry and be able to, but I personally hadn't for most of my life, so now that I'm finding I can, I'm enjoying it, and I was like, almost crying, and then it was like, I was in my home, and it didn't, I would like to good cry with this movie, and it almost happened. So, I think in the theater I would have cried, and that would have been nice. So, if that answers your question, my short review of the theatrical versus home experiences in theaters, I would have cried, and that would have been nice. Over to my next con. Supporting characters had a little less heft. One of the beautiful things about the first film was the Howling Commando group. I wanted to know more about all of them. I was curious, being not as versed in Wonder Woman as, say, Batman or Superman. I know Wonder Woman comics, but I was like, wait, are these guys I should know? I was immediately like, is this like a group of characters that I want to invest in? There was less of that in this one. It's another thing that makes it slightly lesser than the first film. The supporting cast was fine, but like I have less giant standout moments with them, so the supporting cast, slight con for me. There's a couple tropes that don't work. I can't talk about that much in the spoiler-free, but remember this moment for the spoiler-full review, which I'm going to drop in a week and a half. There's some tropes that don't work for me, and it's a real bummer, because I could see what they were trying for, but it didn't land, and they felt like tropes instead of story elements. I didn't believe the sinister plot until Act 3, but then I really, really did, so I'm digesting that. There are moments in the film that I was completely removed from the bad guy plot. Spoiler-free reviews are hard. But in the third act, I was so invested, it made me retroactively like some of the plot that I had been removed from. So I need to watch it again to decide if that was just my experience watching it at home, or if there were some pacing issues in the second act that removed me, or if there were just some bad moments about the bad guy elements in the first 2 acts that were solved in the third. So take that for what you will, but there are some sinister elements that didn't work till the third act for me. And the last of my cons is could have used less of some things and more of the 80s vibing. I would not recommend this movie be much longer. Maybe 5 more minutes, but you would have had to take out other stuff because I wanted at least 10 or 15 more minutes of nostalgia. I've been calling stuff nostalgia since Stranger Things season 1. For me, nostalgia is when you're experiencing a nostalgic feeling in a new way, or when you're making new stuff in a nostalgic way. It's like this Ouroboros of new and old. And I think the way our brains work is we're pattern machines. So I think the pattern element of nostalgia is wonderful, and that's why so many films use it, as well as why remakes exist, and as why sequels exist, and all these other things. But I think that we're living in an age of nostalgia where everyone's hitting a certain point because our generation gaps are so much shorter that we're appreciating things from more and more recently in very different ways. And technology is allowing us to watch things that feel like the 80s in a very specific way. For example, the credits in this look like a VHS tape grain, and I would have liked more of that. I really liked the mall sequence. I really liked the opening 80s flavor. I could have used more 80s, but that's also my bias. I love 80s film, music, etc., etc. So for what it's worth, I would have traded in a couple things and swapped in some 80s, but I will talk about those things more on the spoiler-free review because there are some specifics that I cannot obviously list here. I see one other thing just popped in, and then I'm going to give my overall thoughts and wrap this bad Larry up. We've got one more from Mr. I believe it's Listovan again. Is he back? Wait, it's not popping up. 100% agree. Miss movie theaters so much. There's nothing like it. Digging live review. How is the soundtrack? DC soundtrack so far have been A+. Thank you, man. First of all, thank you for the Streamlab, and also thank you for the live review note, because this is a blast, and I think I will do more of these. So thank you. That is reassuring, and as a narcissist and an egoist, I need those reassurances. The soundtrack, I could have used a little bit more 80s, but there are 2 songs that felt like they were authentically 80s instead of being like cliche trope 80s that I was so impressed by, I took note of it. So clearly that was great. Like, I was actually like, oh, yeah, that's an actual 80s song, not like a, let's make this the song that some kid knows, old man Coy says. And they really worked. The score is obviously incredible. I mean, the Junkie XL score for Wonder Woman, I tweeted out yesterday, I think that might be the most iconic piece of modern soundtrack for superheroes. I think Avengers is like a close second, and I think that Winter Soldier had some great elements, but since Batman and 90s Batman and earlier, I think Wonder Woman's got it for the modern stuff. That cello, that electric cello, the feeling you get, all of that's there. So the score and the soundtrack sing, pun intended, and they really suit the narrative, and they don't distract you, and they also don't feel manipulative. There's some moments with some strong strings that don't feel like they're coercing you to emote. It never gets Sparksy. I love Nicholas Sparks movies, but sometimes I'm like, don't tell me how to feel, let me feel. And this doesn't do that. So the score works with the film, not at the film, is how I would summarize my experience of the soundtrack and score. Overall, well worth the wait. Hated seeing it at home. Very appreciative to have seen it before it was on HBO Max, so thank you, Warner Brothers. If you are still watching this 33 minutes in, I appreciate the hell out of you. Warner Brothers was very cool about making sure this got to me, and the way I watched it was rad. I got to watch it on my TV. Like the way the screener's setup was rad. I would have preferred again to see it in theaters, but the way, if I'm gonna watch it on my TV, I'm glad it was so accessible. So thank you to Warner Brothers. And yeah, I really wish I'd seen it in theaters, but at least the way I watched it at home felt like top notch. This would have blown people away in theaters. The ending is everything the world needs right now, so I get why they pushed it. That being said, I get why they pushed it to coming out now instead of in theaters. The ending is absolutely what the world needs. The ending is so good for today. I don't want to give anything away, so I won't. The ending makes total fucking sense to have out immediately. And you'll see in 2 days when it drops on HBO Max. And finally, the question I assumed everyone was going to ask, is there a post-credit scene? There is not a post-credit scene, but there is a wonderful, charming, delightful, pure mid-credit scene that is just goodness. So stay for the mid-credits. That's gonna do it for our first, as soon as I finish the movie, live review. I think we're gonna do more of these in 2021, but I wanted to kick it off with Wonder Woman 1984 because Wonder Woman deserves it, and this movie getting pushed deserves immediate notice, and I wanted to reach out to you guys as soon as I could and give you guys my thoughts. So, live review, first one, had a good time. I used to do these on Collider Heroes. If you're watching this and just found me through the words Wonder Woman and don't know who I am, I host a number of shows. I used to host Collider Heroes. I still host Comic Book Shopping, which is where I take the people that make these shows and movies and I bring them to the comic book store and introduce them to comics that they particularly might like. So I went with Jake Gyllenhaal to London. We talked Spider-Man as well as comics he'd like beyond the Spider-Man realm. Damon Lindelof, we talked Watchmen. I showed him a bunch of indie stuff that somehow he hadn't seen. That dude knows his comics. Yahya Abdul-Mateen, Kevin Smith, Seth Green, Alex Shipp. We recently had Blue Hunt on from the New Mutants. So if you guys don't know me, check out my other stuff on them YouTubes. New Comic Book Shopping is coming, and Comic Book Shopping can be found over on Collider. But you can find me, Collider, Screen Junkies, Nerdist, all over the place. And thank you if you watched all the way till 37 minutes into this review. I appreciate the hell out of you. Also, I've got a Patreon where I do reviews and I rate every single comic book as well as every single movie and TV show I consume, as well as there is a patron-only podcast where I do verbal reviews of all that shit too. So there's a lot of me on the internet if you enjoyed this, is what I'm saying. I'm done plugging. I hate plugging. I'm done with it. We're done. Wonder Woman, B+, A-. Didn't quite land where the first one did for me, but well worth the wait, well worth your time. I'm very excited to watch it again on Christmas. I'm likely to watch it again either the 25th or 26th on HBO Max. I have HBO Max, so I can't wait till it drops so I can experience it again. That's the best thing I can say about a movie, is that I'm excited to check it out again. So thank you for being here, dear viewers, and check out Wonder Woman 1984, and after you've seen it, leave some comments, like, subscribe, let me know how you enjoyed this live review, and in about a week, we will do, why do people always say we on YouTube? I'm gonna do a spoiler full review and talk about some of the stuff I had to vague book about. Cheetah, awesome. Wonder Woman 84, fantastic. Dive in, enjoy. We'll see you soon. Thank you again to Warner Brothers, and yeah, strap in, audience. It's a fun one.